All right, so what I'm going to do, just going to talk about FRQs a little bit. I'll show you an example of one. I'll go through some pointers for you. And then, if anybody has questions or whatnot, one thing with these is don't overthink this. Okay. So, as we hopefully know by this point, so the AP exam is May 12th, I believe, either May 11th or May 12th. And the AP exam it's 2 hours long. Okay, so it's a relatively short AP exam, and it is made up of 100 multiple choice questions in 70 minutes, which is worth two-thirds of your score. And on the AP exam, you score a 1 through 5, with 5 being the highest score you can get and 1 being the lowest score you can get. So the 100 multiple choice questions, which accounts for two-thirds of your grade, and then two FRQs. FRQ stands for free response question. Two FRQs in 50 minutes, and that accounts for one-third of your grade. The reason why we haven't looked at really at FRQs yet is because, and there's some other AP Psych teachers, some other teachers in the district that like start giving you FRQs on the first test, or start giving their students FRQs. I find that a little bit redundant because these FRQs are kind of like sprinkles on ice cream. All right. Ice cream by itself, which would be the multiple choice, is good. Hey, just some regular chocolate ice cream, all right, is going to do you just fine. Multiple choice is by far the most important part of the AP exam. It's two-thirds of your score. That's why we focus so much on multiple choice, because if you knock the multiple choice out of the water, then the FRQs are kind of just extra, like sprinkles. Like sprinkles on ice cream is good, but you don't need a ton of sprinkles to make the ice cream good, if that analogy makes any sense. Okay. So we don't focus on these a whole lot because they are only one-third of the grade. And historically, students do very, very poorly on these. And the AP exam is a standardized test. And so if you can just do slightly better than the rest of the students in the country on the FRQs, then you are at a big time advantage. So I know with FRQs, with free response questions, people always freak out. And with essays, people are like, oh my God, I got to write an essay. I actually have to know things and whatnot. These are essays. FRQs are essays, but they are not essays in the normal sense. All right. Those of you that are, how many of you all, when you write an essay for English or history or whatnot, you are trying to add in as much bullshit as possible to make it sound good without actually maybe adding a whole lot of substance to it? Okay. You like to use big words and whatnot. You're looking at like dictionary.com for synonyms. All right. These are not like that. All right. For some essays where they're like, all right, you have to have 5 pages, right? And the longer your essay is, the better. Actually, with these, the shorter your essay is, the better. But these aren't necessarily even essays. What these basically are is answering 7 separate questions about a scenario or about something. It's basically just like giving you a scenario and then you just answer different questions regarding it. So I'll show you what one looks like. Okay. And really the thing with these, and we're going to go more through this, but you don't have to be a good writer. You don't have to do anything other than what John Meyer, my AP Psych teacher, always said was, for these, FRQs are what really separates the people who know stuff and don't know stuff. You got to know stuff to be able to do these. But if you know stuff, if you know psychology, then they're really not that hard at all. So here's an example of one. This is not the one that I'm going to give you today. But there are two different types of FRQs on the AP exam. One of them is a concept application one, where they give you a scenario, and then you generally have to apply terms to a scenario. And then one is a research design one, where they might give you some research that you need to interpret, or you need to like draw a bar graph or whatnot. We'll talk more about the research design one later. But here's an example of one from a couple years ago, I think. I'm actually not sure where I got this one, but it's a good one. I'll probably end up giving it to you at some other time. Jackie has been chosen for the lead role in the school play. She is both nervous and excited about this opportunity. Explain how each of the following concepts may help or hinder her performance in the play. And there you have four concepts to explain how they would help their performance in the play, and then explain how the following concepts may hinder her performance in the play. And then you have these three that you would explain separately how they could hinder her performance in the play. Now you can see how I wrote this one. You can see how I wrote it. Okay, this is not like an essay in the sense of like, oh, you're supposed to have 5 sentences per paragraph and blah, blah, blah. No, it is answer the damn question and then move on. Okay, you are just answering the question. You're not adding anything else in there. So that's what that's what they have different formats, but for the most part, the concept application ones will look like that. So, any questions before we get into get into some pointers? Right. I don't know why it's called Canterbury's Tales. It must be a teacher named Canterbury made this, and then it's a play on the book, the Canterbury Tales from like the 1400s. But I got this from Mr. Kirby, and he got this from someone else. And then I've kind of added a few things to it. How to write an ideal AP free response. First thing, all right, where in English class, you have to learn how to write a good introduction and a thesis statement and a conclusion and all that crap. You don't have to do any of that with FRQs. There is no introduction, there is no thesis, there is no conclusion, there are no qualifying statements or whatever they're called. All it is you just write the essay, right? There is no connecting the paragraphs, right? So most FRQs, the amount of paragraphs that you'll have is based on the amount of bullet points, right? But there's no connection between them. Okay, like these are, as I said, it's 7 separate questions right there. So no introduction, no conclusion, no thesis, nothing. You just jump into it. Okay. You do not have to be a good writer. You don't have to be concerned with your grammar really or your spelling. Okay. Your grammar or spelling, this is not Jeff Mercado reading these. Okay. This is the only thing that is scored, the only thing that is scored on AP Psych FRQs is your psychological knowledge. Okay. Doesn't matter how bad of a writer you are, as long as the reader can understand what you are trying to say, then you're fine. Okay. And remember, these are the readers are AP Psych teachers. Okay. I was supposed to do it last year, and it's just like a big like nerd conference basically. I was supposed to do it last year, but it was remote, and so I opted out of doing it. But hopefully, when they go back to doing it in person, I'll be able to do it. Okay, so the only thing that is scored is psychological knowledge. Each one of these bullet points is worth 1 point. All right, so FRQs are out of 7 points, but there's no half points or anything. You either get the credit for it for each one or you don't. And I'll tell you this, the average for the AP Psych exam on the FRQs is like 2.5 points out of 7. That's like the national average on these. So if you can even get 3 or 4 out of 7, you are like kicking its ass. Okay. All right, you should always write in paragraph format. These should never be lists. You shouldn't bullet point them, even though there are bullet points. Each term should just constitute its own separate paragraph. So you see here, right, context dependent memory. First paragraph, context dependent memory would help Jackie's performance because of blah, blah, blah. All right. Then you skip a line and move on. Okay. Now, like I said, this isn't like how you learn how to write in like fifth grade, where it's like 5 sentences per paragraph. You should be able to answer this whole question in about 14 sentences overall. Okay. Each paragraph should be 1 to 2 sentences. And then you move on to the next paragraph, because you'll see why in a sec. But these are timed. You have 25 minutes to write each one of these. So the more you write, the more time it actually takes up. Okay. So these are, you show that you know, and then you move on. Anybody got any questions so far? Okay. All right. This one doesn't really apply right now, but what would the grade be for this one? I don't know what you mean by what would the grade be for this one. Like out of 7. Well, considering I wrote this one, I would get 7 out of 7 on it. Like, does that make sense? Yeah, yeah. Okay. But, most of the time when I'm grading these, like, 3 or 4 out of 7 is pretty much average for these. And the thing with these FRQs is they are very, very nitpicky a lot of the time. Like, you have to have certain wordings for certain things, and it can be a pain in the ass. And that's why people miss a lot of points, because they just like don't word something correctly. But yeah. All right, writing in blue or black ink, that doesn't matter right now. You're going to do it on the computer. But if we actually have the AP exam on in person, then you're going to have to write in blue or black ink, which means you can just scratch stuff out. All right, so here's a really important thing, and one of the reasons why you should just show that you know and move on. All right. Unlike in other types of writing that you do, where you all will put like, well, it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this, and you're just throwing a dart, hoping that it sticks somewhere, and you get one piece of correct information in there to like get the check mark. With these, if you contradict yourself, right, because the whole point of these is showing that you know, showing that you understand the concept. If you contradict yourself, even if you have correct information in there, you will not get the point. Okay? You will not get the point. So, for instance, if on this one right here, okay, if I say, how might the following concepts hinder her performance in the play? And I give an example for proactive interference, something that is new interfering with old, and old interfering with new. If you're like, I can't remember which one it is, so you're going to put both of them in there, you would not get that point, because you're contradicting it. Even though if you're correct on one of them, you're incorrect on the other side of it. And so it like cancels it out. Does that make sense? Because you're not showing that you know what you are talking about. That is why you should really just, okay, write what you know. If you're unsure, just go with what you think, write what you know, and then move on. The more you write, sometimes you can kind of like get yourself in trouble with that. You should write legibly. If you think about it, these AP scores are grading somewhere between 500 and 1,000 essays per day, right? They read essays for 9 hours a day. If they can't read it, if your handwriting is so shitty they can't read it, they're not going to score it. They don't have any obligation to score every single one of them. If they can't read it, they're not going to score it. So, and if I can't read it, I'm not going to grade it. When you are doing definitions, and you don't always have to do a definition, but it's good too. Okay. You shouldn't use the root word in the definition, like repressing is to repress memories. Like that doesn't make sense. All right. even though you are showing that you know, showing that you understand the concept, you should write these as if you are explaining the concept to a third grader, right? Write them in the assumption that the reader does not know what these are, even though they do. Write them with the assumption that they don't know what they are, and keep it simple. Right? Keep it simple, stupid. Okay? Keep it simple. Make it so everybody could understand it. So one of the things, and we're going to talk more about this here in a sec with task verbs, but in there are different types of prompts, and they will ask you to do different things. Sometimes they're going to ask you to apply. Sometimes they're going to ask you to describe whatnot. Sometimes they will ask for a definition of the term, and sometimes they won't. If they ask for a definition, then that means you have to define it. But if they don't ask for a definition, it is always good to define the word in the first sentence of the paragraph. Because if they don't ask for a definition and you get the definition wrong, it doesn't matter. Okay? Because that's not part of the question. If you get it wrong, it's not a contradiction. But sometimes what can happen is if your application is weak, but your definition is strong, some readers will give you the benefit of the doubt. And so if it doesn't, even if it doesn't ask to define, your first sentence should just be context dependent memory is blah, blah, blah. And then you should always have the term in the paragraph. Make sure that whatever the term is that you're applying, it is clearly there in the paragraph. It just makes the scoring a lot easier for the scorer. And that's one of the other things. You're trying to make this easy for them, okay? Because they'll, imagine grading stuff for 9 hours a day. You're going to be pretty annoyed by the end of it. All right, are there any questions about those? Okay. All right, so here's some task verbs that they've given us that like what they could ask you to do in an FRQ. Those of you who have taken like AP Huge, I know that AP Huge has had these task verbs for a while. And I think that they've like added them. They just added them into Psych. Some of these are for certain types of FRQs. If they ask you to construct or draw, that means you're going to like draw a graph. That would be more so with the research design ones. They asked them to, about 6 years ago, they asked them to draw a graph, and that had never really been done before on the AP exam, and students like freaked out. They like came to me afterwards. They're like, we had to draw a bar graph. And I was like, well, did you? They're like, well, it's like it's a bar graph. Like, but it's like one of those things where in the context of psychology, they couldn't like wrap it. If they ask you to define, that means just give the definition of a term. If they ask you to describe, which is what I'll show you the one that I'm gonna have you do. They ask you to describe, all right? So you're given relevant characteristics, whatever they are wanting. If they ask you to draw a conclusion, this would be like if they could give you like a set of data and you would have to interpret the data somehow. And you wouldn't have to do math or anything like that, but they would just have you interpret the data. Okay. If they ask you to explain, that can be explaining how, analyzing a relationship. Okay. If they ask you to explain why, okay, they could use using psychological terms to explain different motivations or whatnot. If they ask you to identify, okay, that would be like in a research design one, it'd be like identify the independent variable in the study. And all you would have to put to get that point would be the independent variable is blah, blah, blah. Boom. That's it. And then asking you to apply, that's the most common one. Um, Take the term that's given, like on this one right here, and explain or apply it to the scenario that is given. So all of those are different terms that they can use in FRQ. It doesn't mean they're going to be in every single one, but these are the task verbs that they use in different styles of questions. All right, does anybody have any questions about that? Almost done. So the FRQ that I'm going to have you do today, and I'm going to have you're going to do it on your own. Okay, and then we're going to look at it next class probably, or the class after, just depending. And I'm going to give you a rubric and whatnot. It's going to be worth 10 informal points, and then probably I'll give you some extra points for doing the rubric as well. So if you don't do it, then you can't do the rubric, which means you're probably going to be missing out on like 20 informal points. All right, so the prompt that I'm giving you, for each of the following terms, describe, there's one of the task verbs, describe a specific example. So it's asking for something specific that clearly demonstrates an understanding of how each of the following concepts can lead to an inaccurate perception, cognition, or conclusion. Each example must include an explanation of the relationship between the concept and the inaccuracy. So what they are asking you to do here, they're not giving you a scenario. So what they're asking you to do is come up with your own example of how these different terms could lead to an inaccurate perception. And I'll give you an example. Let's say for retroactive interference, you should define it. Retroactive interference is when new information interferes with your memory of old information. But then that wouldn't score. The thing that would score, and I'm going to put it in the chat, is if you said something like retroactive interference could lead to an inaccurate perception or memory in AP psychology if new units that you have learned get in the way of being able to remember old units. Boom. That's all you need for retroactive interference. That's all you would need to put, and you would get that point. Okay, so this one's 6. So how many paragraphs are you going to have, or how many separate answers are you going to have? 6. Please, please, please. I don't know what you all like. Don't think in paragraphs for some reason, and I think it might have something to do with texting. But like, I will get essays where it's just like one big, like the whole paper is just cut. Like there's no indentation, there's no split between different terms. And like those are a pain in the ass to grade because it's like visually it's hard to tell like what you are actually answering. You're going to have, just think about this one right here, 6 different like answer things typed out. Okay. All right. So I have a few more instructions right there. But just think it's just 6 separate questions, and you're just answering how they can lead to inaccurate perceptions. A specific example. Definitions don't score. The example is what is scoring here. So